Homeschooling has its growing pains. Hi, I'm Mark.
Hi, I'm Scott, and this is Church is Lame, the podcast where we fix the church by talking about the stupid things churches do that break the entire body. Mark, what do you got for us this week?
So I have to apologize off the bat for, making a growing pains reference because, I know like nobody who watches us is probably, old enough to remember this freaking show. But Kirk Cameron, who I think most people have heard of at this point, he was on this show called Growing Pains, and it was just this super sanitized, happy family, 80s show, right?
Which most sitcoms were back in the 80s.
Yeah, and Kirk Cameron became a Christian and started becoming very. I don't want to make it sound like bad, right? Like he just became like a very, outspoken, vocal personality.
Right.
Because he was just kind of a very wholesome dude, like that. He had like that whole image, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, he's kind of maintained this air, I think, in the, the church, at least American church, for most Christians, right? Just kind of being a generally okay dude.
Right.
And I don't have any individual problem with the guy,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to I'm not trying to mock Kirk Cameron at all. I have respect for the guy, but he has done something which just plays into this Christian stereotype that bugs me. So he did this new documentary, and it's called The Homeschool Awakening. So it's all about how more people are getting into homeschooling. And anybody who's known me knows that I don't understand why everybody thinks that they're competent to teach their child.
Yes, indeed. Hey, I think we should retitle the movie and retitle it Kirk Cameron Discovers Homeschooling. Like, it's been around forever. Homeschooling has been, I don't want to say a craze, but it's certainly been a reality. As long as I've been alive, there's always been a certain section of the population who just, for whatever reason, is not happy with the public school system. They're not happy, or they don't have the financial resources to go to the private school system. And so they just do it on their own because it's the best of the three choices in their mind. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and I certainly understand in certain cases, it's really the best option you have. My godfather was a missionary for a number of years, and they did homeschooling.
Yeah.
And that was an incredibly sensible decision for them to do. But just something about the reason that a lot of Christians in this country decide to homeschool their kids, it bugs me. I had two parents, which with bachelor's degrees, and my mother was a teacher. My dad went to school to be a music teacher. So I had parents trained in how to teach people.
Right.
So they didn't want to homeschool us. And it seems like, I feel like the only reason that anybody, like a Christian in particular, would want to homeschool, or I guess maybe a lot of people, I shouldn't maybe pick on just Christians here, but I think Christians have a real weird relationship with homeschooling, is that it seems to be like an attempt to just kind of insulate children against corrupting forces. Like the beginning of this article is, in the wake of recent school violence and the woke movement, families across the nation are looking at the benefits of homeschooling their children like never before. And if woke is your problem, like school violence, I get it, except, that the people that are most likely to oppose gun control legislation, you have no right to complain about violence.
Right.
But it's these mass shootings would be, a lot of them would be helped with better gun regulation. And I'm a person that likes guns, so I'm not saying this is like a, loopy Dem just saying, get rid of the guns. Like, no, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know.
It's interesting how it starts off talking about school violence and the woke movement, like instantly going into that, like what words can we use to bring about the fear response in the reader, or in the documentary, air quotes, watcher. How can we start off in a spirit of fear? Oh, hey, school shootings and the woke movement. And also, how disappointing is it that the church would take the word woke and turn it and weaponize it, right?
Right.
And definitely say, hey, anybody who is an idealist, who is dreaming of a better tomorrow, and who looks at the world for what it could be instead of what it is, like they're woke and they're out of touch, and they are to be feared because they're trying to turn us all into homosexual liberals, you know? Like, how disappointing is it that that is the stance of the modern American church?
Right. And like, so if you're watching or listening to this and you don't really know what the word woke is supposed to mean, it just means that somebody who is, woken up to the reality that, relations between the genders, between the races, between economic classes aren't the shiny, happy, version that we've been sold for many decades in this country. A lot of people kind of have this like, Leave It to Beaver, or, Andy Griffith Show kind of, clean America kind of feeling. And it's like, well, there are problems, and so woke is just meant to say like you are aware that these things aren't as, good as they should be.
Right. And I think it's
I don't know why that's such like a fearsome thing.
Because people get offended because woke doesn't stand on its own. Woke exists in a continuum, right? And so to suggest that you're awake is to suggest that somebody else is asleep. And so once again, people get offended at things that don't need to be offended at. This is the story of mankind, that we keep moving forward, we keep evolving, we keep creating, we keep getting more knowledge, we keep building better things. This is the story of humanity. So there will always be people that are ahead of the curve pushing forward. There will always be people who are, quote unquote, awakened more than the rest of us. And that is not to be feared or to be mocked. That is a gift, for those of us who believe in God. That is a gift from God, that people are given insight beyond what the rest of us in the big part of the standard deviation curve have,
Yeah. And then, when you like speaking of like just like the fear mongering, it's kind of inherent in this, like woke has become a fear mongering word with, Christians of a particular kind of bent. Like there's this, let me read this here. It says, and if you look at the public education system, removing prayer from schools, removing God and the Bible from school, and replacing those things with progressive ideas like critical race theory, gender theory, and teaching children to decide whether or not they prefer to be a boy or a girl. It's like, so this is, the most ignorant thing that somebody could have written here. It's like, okay, you're saying children, critical race theory is not something you would like even read like about, much less study until you're in college. Like as a bachelor's student, you might learn that critical race theory is a thing. Like I learned when I got my bachelor's, but you wouldn't do critical race theory until you were, in law school. So like, that's kind of obscene, gender theory. Again, that's another high level educational thing. Nobody's teaching children this. Nobody's teaching children to decide whether or not they prefer being a boy or a girl. Like that's a complete misunderstanding of what being transgender is.
Right.
And then as for removing prayer from schools and God and the Bible from schools, it's like, well, these are secular schools. They're public schools. They're meant to be able to cater to, everybody who lives in this country, whether or not you're a Christian. And and the whole thing of saying like we need to have prayer in schools is like, there is this, like, I don't want to make it seem like it's less common or more common than it is, but I don't know how to really say it. Like there's this tendency among some Christian groups to want to sacralize everything.
Yeah.
Like when we talked about the coach with the whole, praying on the 50-yard line thing, right? It's like, he's like, you're trying to like sacralize completely neutral things. Like school, like an education does not need to be desacralized because, if you're going to teach somebody about how to do math, you do not need to at the same time be teaching them the gospel.
Right.
And vice versa. So, to say like, well, we pulled God out of schools, like, right. So then what are you as a parent doing?
Right. There was a time in the history of this country when the world was at war, right? We have a convenient name for that. It was called World War I and World War II. Pro tip for you there, right? And so, so that I just say that to say that there was a time in this country's history where it made sense to say a Pledge of Allegiance, right? Because we had a world at war with each other, right? But that's not where we are anymore. We are now in a day and age of an interconnected world. That doesn't mean that there's peace everywhere, But that means that all the leaders of these countries understand that peace and prosperity go hand in hand with one another, that war does nothing but bad things for everybody, right? It ruins economies, it ruins people's lives, it ruins people's livelihoods. It forces people to become immigrants, and to leave their homes. Nothing good comes from war. And so there's no need anymore to have this super sense of we need to announce to our kids that our country is the best, right? Because they will never grow up in a world where they have to take a us or them mentality to looking at the world, right? Like at any point in their lives, they can go get themselves a passport and Pop-Tart out to Europe for a week and then come back, and Pop-Tart out to Asia for a week and then come back, right? They live in an interconnected world where the world wants to be peacefully interconnected with one another.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like, you have people that they want to raise their children with an education that they think is good.
Sure.
Everybody wants that, right? Like Christians are no different than anybody else. But defining that education as being inherently religious is awkward, because there's no reason that an education needs to be inherently religious, because you can do a religious education separately. Like there's a quote in here, and this is from Kirk Cameron. It says, "These are questions that can only be answered when you are free to pass your faith to your children and to teach your children to see the world through the lens that God's given us." And my question is, what are you talking about? Like, if you Scott, you have children, and they're in school, and yet somehow I'm sure that they're learning something about God and Jesus, right?
Well, not in their public school, they're not, but.
Well, no, but like, as a parent,
Absolutely. Yes. They are learning more than they want to learn.
So sending them to public school doesn't take away your right to pass on your faith traditions to your children.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't know where you were going at first, but absolutely.
Yeah. It's just like absurd thing to me to think like this is the logic that is being used to defend the choice to homeschool. And I mean, I can't get over, like, when we do this podcast, we're talking about the things that Christians do that is lame.
Yeah.
And this kind of environment, I really feel like it does nothing more than kind of reinforce all the lameness. So you can hide your children from, alternative ideas, and you can keep them insulated from what other, people think in dissenting opinions. And so they never have to test what they think or believe. They're just meant to accept it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that's good. I mean, it's like, as iron sharpens iron. Well, what's the iron being sharpened, right?
Right. Yeah. So this is we're taking our ball home with us section of the presentation, right? So the attempt to bring intelligent design into the classroom has failed across the whole country, right? Because there's nothing about intelligent design that can be taught in the same way that science and evolution can be taught, right? And so it has been a stunning failure to get intelligent design put into the public school curriculum. And so now this is all the people who are mad that they don't get to have their theology be the preferred theology of their school. This is now them taking their ball home.
Yeah, like my brother, who is an atheist, he asked me once, he was like, basically, like, what do I think about intelligent design? And I'm like, it's just creationism under a different name. And I don't think that it's something that we should be teaching in public schools. I don't want to get into the evolution versus intelligent design debate now.
Right.
But it's like, to that point, it's wanting to normalize, what we believe. And that's a noble thing to want, right? I mean, it's like, we want to spread the gospel, but it's like, forcing, the kids in the classroom who are, Muslim or Sikh, or whose parents are atheists, or, Buddhists, or, Jains, there's so much out there. It's like to force them to try to have to swallow my beliefs. It's like, I think that cheapens what I believe.
Right.
If I'm going to try to force it on other people, I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, that's just how I feel about it, though.
Yeah, I get caught up in this, that it's not like Christian parents don't understand. Like, Christian parents would never want Muslim beliefs forced on their kids at school.
Right.
Right? They would never want an atheist non-belief forced on their kids at school. They would never want Buddhist beliefs forced on their kids. So they understand that it is inherently bad to force your religious beliefs on other children unless you're a Christian.
Yeah.
My
It's
brain just
deeply
kind of
hypocritical.
melts. Yeah, it's deeply hypocritical. But not only hypocritical, once again, it's irrational.
Mhm.
Right? And that's the part that upsets me. Like, we're all hypocrites about certain things, right?
For sure.
Like, we all paint ourselves in the most graceful ways, and then we always give other people the disapproving finger. That's also part of human nature. But just because we're hypocritical doesn't mean we have to be irrational. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
we can still be rational in that hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Like, of course I want what's best for whatever situation makes it best for me. Well, of course I want that. That makes total sense.
Now it's like I so don't want to respond with like a complete smart aleck response to what you just said, but it's like,
Do it.
It's just like I don't want to, because like I'm like it's the fruit is hanging too low.
Do it.
Oh, yeah, oh my gosh, like I had a thought in my brain and it just went on vacation.
Right.
Like it just completely jumped out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just, when it comes to like the value, like the most basic, ethical principle possible, right, is the golden rule. Don't, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
And, Christians love to lay special claim to that ethical principle.
Yeah.
And yet, this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Where like they get upset that they can't do unto others as they don't want done unto themselves.
Right. There's one more aspect of this that I think is fascinating. Mark, let's say you and I, we took our annual income and, here in one of the wealthiest suburbs of Chicago, our incomes don't get us super far. I mean, we're not struggling, right? We're not hungry.
No.
We've got roof over. We're fine. Everything's fine, right? But we are not ever going to become uber wealthy just off of our work incomes, right?
Definitely not.
But if you were to take our work incomes and let's move to Vietnam, right? We would live like kings for the same amount of money, right? And there's this thing with Kirk Cameron attached to this, right? In the rest of the universe, he's a nobody, right? In the Hollywood world, he's a nobody. In the TV world, he's a little bit of a small fry. But here in the Christian media world, he is like Tom Cruise, the Tom Cruise of Christian movies, It's like, and so
I would have given that one to Kevin Sorbo. Just...
And so here in the Christian entertainment world, he speaks and people listen, but for no rational reason, except that he's been good at keeping himself in the spotlight and kind of making the best out of this wholesome image that he's that he's curated for himself, and he just kind of keeps the plate spinning, right? He keeps enough of the plate spinning that he's kind of like this evergreen part of the Christian entertainment world. And like, I just don't understand what makes him an authority on education.
Well, I'm going to have to go probably say nothing, I mean, but then, like if you're making a documentary, you don't really have to be an expert in the thing you're making a documentary on. You're just kind of documenting. I guess that's the principle of it.
Yeah.
But I can guarantee that this advertisement, that this documentary, words is hard, is that he definitely did not present the best arguments against homeschooling.
Right.
There might be like some token homage to the homeschooling thing. Not having seen the documentary, I can't comment specifically on it, but I've seen enough Christian things to know that that's the pattern. The pattern is not to present the other side's arguments in anything other than, a straw man or an absurdist kind of a format.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. Although I like, right, this is preaching to the choir, essentially, right? Like there's nobody watching a Kirk Cameron documentary that isn't Christian. You know what I mean?
Right. Who isn't probably already like fairly, open to homeschooling.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like it's different than say, I can't think of a celebrity that actually before his fall from grace, Will Smith just did this nature documentary, right?
Mhm.
And he did it in Will Smith fashion, like big money, big production, big sets. It was super cool to watch, right? And it's Will Smith. And so because it's Will Smith, you can put it on Apple's network and get a whole world around it. And so I think it's a little bit, oh, isn't that cute? Kirk Cameron decided to make a documentary. When you compare it to real people with real sources who do the real work and the real research, and then you see, oh, here's Kirk Cameron's documentary. Oh, good try, buddy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because documentaries are not a replacement for serious study.
Yeah.
And by serious study, I mean using academic rigor.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of documentaries that I've watched and I've enjoyed in spite of the fact that they are just, not academic, and that's not their point.
Right.
Like most of the documentaries that I've seen, I think I would really qualify as propaganda, not as journalistic.
I agree that they're not journalistic, but I think propaganda may be. Here's what I think. I think every documentary that I've seen in the last 5 years has been sponsored by some corporate entity.
Mhm.
And therefore, most documentaries to me feel a lot more like long form advertising.
Yeah, I think you and me are saying the same thing.
Yeah.
I use the word. I don't attach that much baggage to the word propaganda.
I usually attach political baggage to propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I think you're making the point that I wanted to make, but you are
Yeah.
definitely saying it better. I think I want to take another step forward here and looking at another quote in this article.
Do it.
So they are just looking for a better educational opportunity for their children. And when you think about it, the difference between one-on-one education, 1-on-2 or 3 or 4 or 5 is a completely different situation than one teacher and 30 kids in a classroom. So yeah, it's a different situation.
I can do math.
Right. But I don't think you understand how teaching works. And, sometimes there are issues with students who need additional attention who can't get it in a public classroom because there's not enough resources. So stop complaining about taxes. Let's increase the resources in the classroom so that's not an issue. Just throwing that out there. But then, I'm going to have to step back and kind of go to, remind everybody that I said, what makes you think you're qualified to teach?
Right.
My wife is a teacher. She teaches middle school, does ESL stuff. And you know what? Her kids generally get, a lot of this attention.
Right.
That's her job. She went to school to learn how to become a teacher. She has, an advanced degree in teaching. It is a skill, and just deciding that you're going to do it isn't sufficient. And it's absurd to me that people think it is. It's like you are saying so many bad things about teachers and the hard work they do to become teachers when you say that you can do their job with none of the education or training.
Right.
But then this quote, when I saw this, I got really stuck on this. They're just looking for a better educational opportunity. Well, in order to homeschool somebody, right, you have to be at home.
Right.
So there is this is kind of a classist thing to say, right? Like you're assuming that the people you're addressing here can afford to have one parent not working
Mm-hmm.
in order to stay home and school these children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an option available to everybody.
Right.
And so, where's your solution for people who, don't do this? Now, I've heard of a homeschooling setup where it's you might have kids will kind of rotate between different people's houses.
Right.
But at that rate, you're just kind of back into small classrooms. So instead of, 30 kids, it's 10.
Yeah.
So it's you're not doing any better.
Right. Yeah, this whole thing just kind of smells like, once again, it's not science. So it's not evidence that than where you can draw a conclusion. It's a conclusion in search of evidence, right?
Mhm.
And so yeah, I mean, if you want to oversimplify the problem to all things being equal, class sizes are better and small class sizes are just better. Well, yeah, you're right. If all things being equal, then you are right. Then, having more teachers per student or having less students per teacher, whichever way you want to say it, is a better thing. But not all things are equal, right? And so people have to make choices. And like you said, there are people who never have to make hard choices because through whatever situation, whether they've inherited wealth, whether they've created their own wealth, they never have to make hard choices again. And that's great. I have no problem. Go ahead and do your thing, right? But at some point, somebody out there is thinking about what can we do to be the rising water that lifts all boats, right?
Right.
And so when you start thinking in solving the bigger problems, you kind of very quickly see who's serious about it and who's not. And that's kind of where this article leaves me feeling. It's kind of like this is not a serious attempt at talking about quality education. This is really this. Like you said. This is very propagandist instead, and that's so disappointing. That is what the church would settle for.
Yeah. And that's like the thing that I would want anybody to take away from this is like, we as Christians do not need to support religious education in a public school.
Right.
The thing is, if you want your children to have a religious education, you need to take responsibility for it. You need to make sure that you're going to a church that provides the appropriate resources to provide that education as well, like youth groups, Sunday school, confirmation, these sorts of things. Like, there's nothing wrong with learning about American history and not learning about Jesus at the same time.
Right.
The two things are not related. And if you think they are, well, tell me how many slaves Jesus whipped, and then we can have that conversation.
Right. The other thing is when you are truly dedicated to higher education, to teaching kids, not just how to add 2 + 2, but how to reason well. Not just teaching them their ABCs, but teaching them the literary classics, right? When you are really interested in feeding these minds everything they can consume, their minds will eventually get to the big questions in life. Who am I? What am I about? What is life about? And that question will lead them to the Bible. If you would have a little bit of faith, a little bit of trust, and continue to feed and nourish them and not worry about how mad you are that the world doesn't fit the way you want it to fit, Like they'll get there. If you do your job as a parent, your kids will get there. And you don't have to bludgeon the world into conforming to what you want it to look like.
Yeah, it's not the world's fault that you suck.
You are lame. And this is lame. Yeah, this is totally lame.
So I'm going to leave it at that, right? Because I don't think I can top myself right there.
Nope, I think so. Hey, so we also want to, at the end of every episode, say thank you to new subscribers. And this week is no different, with Emmanuel Otal being a new YouTube subscriber. Words is hard. Being a new YouTube I should just stop. Being a new YouTube subscriber, and Zachary Raymer. So thank you guys. Really appreciate your subscribership. Is that the right word?
Sure.
Subscription. We really appreciate your subscription. And if you would like to keep up to date with videos on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified, and all those good clicky things. And wherever else you can find things online, you can find us with Church is Lame. And if you'd like to communicate with us directly, churchislamepodcast@gmail.com. Yeah.
Yeah, and once again, for me, also, thank you so much for being part of this and for, consuming the nonsense and dribble that comes out of my mouth, at least. You know, and like Scott said, you know, ring that bell. But of course, there's another bell we need to talk about for a moment.
Holy cow, that was a great transition. Wow.
I try.
Nicely done. Rob Bell, we missed you again. We're so sorry. We are schmucks. We are just schmucks. But we will have you. It will be done.
Yes. And, you know, with that, everybody, you know, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and to be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.